Hey, a few weeks ago, all was right in my world. It was an early Saturday morning, a beautiful, sunny, hot day. My wife was still asleep. My son Grayson, 1 year old, was still asleep. And I was heading to a golf scramble, which I was excited about, primarily because I'm terrible at golf, but the three guys I were playing with were really, really good. So I thought I might pull out a W on the golf course today as well. And so I was excited, and I got up in just enough time to where I could not rush through the morning. I had read my Bible, drank some coffee, took a long hot shower, listened to some worship music, right? It was one of those mornings where it was deep, abiding peace, all sense of contentment in my life. And so I went, put my golf clubs in the car, got my shoes in the car, and I went to kiss my wife and tell her goodbye. And as I was walking out the door, I went to look where I left my keys. I thought I had left my keys the night before on the counter, and my keys weren't there, which all good, right? Go look in a secondary place where maybe I had left them from the night before. Keys weren't in the secondary place, and so I did what every good husband does. I didn't lose my keys. My wife lost my keys. And so I went to wake up my wife. I woke her up real sweetly and gently. Hey, babe, where'd you put my keys from the night before? And she looks at me and says, maybe I left them on the hanger, the key hanger we got by the garage door. I'm like, yeah, that's it, key hanger. So I run to the key hanger. Keys aren't there. So this time I run back to Megan a second time. Hey, babe, where'd you put my keys? Maybe I was out on the back deck with Grayson. Maybe they're on the back deck. And I look on the back deck. I'm like, why the back deck? But I go on the back deck, and they're still not there. So I run back a third time. And this time my tone has changed a little bit. Forgive me. And her tone changed a little bit. And I said, hey, Meg, my Honda keys. When I leave them somewhere from the night before, don't move them. And she said, Austin, go check, which is the most annoying question when you lose something, when somebody would ask you this question. Hey, did you check on where you last had them? Right? Because if I'd already done that, I would have found the keys. If I had done that, no, Megan, I haven't found my keys yet. So you can feel my heart beating, right? I was waiting to the last minute to get there, so I'm already late. I run to the edge of our garage door, and I reach in my pocket to grab my phone because I wanted to call the guys and have one of them come get me. And in my pocket were my keys the whole time. And so if I could replay that Saturday morning for you, 1 second, all was right, deep abiding peace. And then 1 moment later, I'm missing the thing that I think I need. And all of a sudden, chaos in my soul and in my life. And I'm running frantically through my house. And you could argue that I went from contentment, it was good, to extreme discontentment when the thing that I thought I needed wasn't with me just like that. In the heart of that story, what I want you to see today is that the thing I needed that morning for contentment, it was with me the entire time. And that's the heart of the message for today. If I had a title, it would be, the big idea is that the secret, what is the secret in life to contentment? To living a life of contentment no matter the circumstance. The definition of contentment in Webster, it's a state of satisfaction or happiness in life. And the word content can also be translated as the word satisfied, fulfilled. And it describes somebody who has discovered resources that are more than enough for any situation or circumstance that might arise. And so what is the secret recipe for, come on, Pinelake family, for us to live in contentment? No matter what we're walking through, what's the recipe? And so I'm going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 6 today if you have a Bible. 1 Timothy chapter 6, the Apostle Paul is writing to young pastor leader Timothy. Timothy's young in ministry. Paul's been writing about some people who have been struggling with contentment, and so he potentially thinks that Timothy might be struggling with satisfaction and contentment, and he's longing after things that wouldn't satisfy. And so he writes to Timothy in prison, the end of his life, Paul writes these words on contentment. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, he says this. He says, but godliness, pursuing after the heart of God, with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world. When you're born, you're bringing nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, he says, we will be content with that. 3 verses I want to land on today. I was reading this recently in my own L3 reflective time. And there was a morning when, I'm just being honest, I was walking through some discontentment in my life. I was frustrated with a few things, and I read those words, and I wrote in my Bible that morning, the secret to contentment. What is it? Because let's just be real this morning. There's so much in our life. There's so much in your life right now that you might not be content about right now. Your spouse, your kids, your family, your job, your financial situation. Right? Christmas and Thanksgiving are around the corner. Will I have enough this year? Will I be enough this year? All the questions, discontentment, the list of things we're discontent about could fill up an auditorium. And there are believers in Jesus who never find contentment. They put faith in the Son of God who defeated death on the cross, and yet through their life, they struggle with feeling like, are they enough? Will they be enough? They never find contentment or satisfaction. And it is the one thing that at all of our campuses, online today, here at the Res, you'd put your hand up and you would say, yeah, preacher, I want that. I want that. But it's also the one thing you can't seem to find. And entertainment and our culture and social media is driven to make you discontent. And it makes it so much harder today. Think about it. Maybe this past week you went to go work out and you hadn't done it in a while, so you felt proud of yourself. You did 30 minutes on the elliptical for a couple miles, wasn't too fast, and you get back in your car, you flip on social media, and what do you see? Well, there's CrossFit Corey and Orange Theory Olivia, and they're doing handstand walks with kettlebells between their legs. And you're like, discontent. Or maybe, you're hanging out with your husband or your man, and all is right, and you look on your phone, and your girlfriend's husband or man has taken her to Ruth Chris Steakhouse. He's dressed up in a suit, and he's gotten her flowers, and you're looking at your man. He's eating leftover Chinese food playing video games. And just like that, there's discontentment. And it happens. You're chilling. You're hanging out. You grab your phone, and you see a photo of what someone else is doing. You see something that you don't have. And here comes what I would call the if-only game, which can become deadly. You'll go, if only in life right now, if only I made more. If only my kids were just like them. If only my spouse was just fill in the blank. If only my house looked like that. If only I was farther along in my career. If only I wasn't single. If only I was just married. And here's what we'll do. We'll even long for another season of life. We won't sit in the season we're in. And if only I was out of college. If only I was at a graduate school. If only, we had kids, because when we have kids, that's going to make our marriage better. Or if only our kids were out of the house, praise God, then we'll be empty nesters and we'll be good. If only I was retired. Once I get to retirement, all's going to be right in my life. And two of the deadliest words in a Christian's vocabulary are the words if only. And discontentment, if we're not careful, it can become such a very subtle sin because it's almost always internal. And it is so easy for Satan to use because all he has to do is invite you to take your eyes off of Jesus as the prize and to look at something else that you don't have and something you think you need. And everyone today at all of our campuses, you're looking for the best life possible. And what discontentment does is it convinces you that the best life is somebody else's life, and it convinces you not to live your own life. And this could be why you're so unhappy. You do church things, you do Jesus things, and yet you're still, because the next thing will never stop being the next thing. Author John Steinbeck writes that we can shoot rockets into space, but we can't seem to cure discontentment. It is a silent killer in your life right now. And so, what's the secret sauce? How do we live in it, Austin? How do I find it? Well, here's what I want to do. I want to give you hope today, and I want to give you comfort and direction that contentment is possible, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstance. And here's what I know is potentially happening. Maybe you're sitting in the back of a room in Oxford or Madison. It's a crowded room in Starkville, and you're in the back of the room and you're watching a preacher on a video screen, and you're going, you don't know my life. Like, you don't know what I'm walking through. You don't know what I'm experiencing. How can you say that it's possible? Here's how I can say it's possible. The Apostle Paul is giving Timothy the tools to fight for contentment in a world full of discontentment. Paul's writing this in prison. He's been in prison. He's about to die for his faith. So here's what I want you to see. The advice is credible. The source is reputable. This isn't Austin telling you how to find it. This is the Apostle Paul in prison who, according to what he wrote to the church in Philippi a couple years back before he wrote 1 Timothy, he says this in Philippians 4. He says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content. Everybody say content. 1, 2, 3. Content. He says, I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. And I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. And then Philippians 4:13, the verse that is often taken out of context, he says, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And he's writing this at the end of his life, and he's in prison. This is nearing the end, and it's cool because he writes the book of Philippians in AD, what is believed to be AD 62. It's believed that he wrote 1 Timothy in AD 64, so I want you to catch this. He's found it. So he's writing to Timothy from a place of, I found it. So I don't want you to learn from me today. We're learning from the Apostle Paul writing to Timothy, this is where I found bread. A couple weeks ago in my L3 time, I'm just one beggar trying to tell another beggar where I found bread. He's given Timothy the tools to fight. And I want you to catch that idea because it is a fight for contentment in your life. It's a fight. Paul says, I learned it. It doesn't just happen. Discontentment comes free in your life. It just happens. Leave service today, something could happen, all of a sudden, discontentment. Contentment takes work. It is a fight every single day. So what are we fighting for? What are the tools? Here's the fight. Number one, you need to fight each day to view Jesus as enough. Fight each day to view that Jesus is enough. And this is more than I put my faith in Jesus or I prayed a prayer to receive Jesus. This is learning to view Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the man who died for the forgiveness of your sins as the prize, as the treasure in life. That Christians and people who identify with Jesus are not just people who like Jesus and think that he's awesome and makes them feel good. Christians are people who want to look like Jesus and think that he's everything. And you need to learn that he is everything. Paul writes in verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. And the word here he uses for contentment, it meant that Timothy had a complete self-sufficiency in life. Why? Because he had Jesus. He didn't need anything else. He wasn't longing for anything more. And in chapter 6, he's been addressing, earlier in those first 5 verses of chapter 6, he's addressing false teachers who have bad theology and bad motives for pursuing God. Verse 5, he says, for these people, godliness was a means of gain. As if to say they were pursuing godliness because they wanted to look good and they wanted to appear godly and they were pursuing the gift, not the giver. And so he's looking at Timothy and he's going, don't do that. It doesn't satisfy and it doesn't honor God. It's probably why Paul says godliness with contentment, not godliness is contentment. Did you notice that he didn't say that? Because you can pursue godliness for all the wrong reasons, for selfish, impure motives. So he says, no, godliness with contentment, which means you're pursuing Jesus because he's the prize. I get his presence. I get him. True contentment is connected to viewing him as the prize, and following him will become the goal in your life. And I think for so many of you, you know the gospel and you know Jesus and you can proclaim him and identify with him, but there is this part of you that still thinks Jesus plus something will be what gets you there to that place of contentment. Jesus plus the next season. Jesus plus that particular job. Jesus plus more money. Jesus plus getting married. Austin, when I'm no longer on the single train. And you think, once I'm there, then I'm good. And the secret is learning to live with what I would call an even if faith. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, before they're thrown into the fiery furnace, they said, even if this happens. So even if you never get the money, the job, the promotion, the spouse, you still get Jesus. And what I've learned in life is that sometimes God won't give you those desires until you found your satisfaction and fulfillment in him. And hear my heart, God loves you and he wants to bless you. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says it himself. The Father loves giving good gifts to his kids. So he knows your deepest longings and desires. He wants to bless you with them. He also knows that you have to find what you're looking for in him, because the next thing will never stop becoming the next thing. There was a 60-minute interview on CBS 60 Minutes that was done with Tom Brady in 2005. This was after he had won 3 Super Bowl rings. He was married to a supermodel, millions of dollars, one of the most influential people in the world. And in the interview, he's asked this question, hey, Tom, man, you've kind of accomplished it all. What else is there for you out there? And it's funny watching him process. As a 27-year-old, he goes, yeah, it's 27. I'm thinking, and he literally makes this statement. He says, there's got to be more than this. There's got to be something else out there. And so today, what you're looking for and where you're looking for it, it will never be found in all the places that you're searching and striving for. That there's no substitute in our life that can satisfy. It's only Jesus. He is your treasure. And until you figure that out, you'll always be saying the same thing as Tom. Hey, there's got to be more. There's got to be this next thing. Jesus is enough. In the heart of godliness, I love that Paul uses the word godliness. What's the heart of godliness? It's knowing God and then savoring God as enough. That I have everything I need, that nothing in the world compares to him. Jesus says in John chapter 6, he says to them, I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall not thirst. This is not physical hunger and physical thirst. This is a spiritual hunger and thirst, this deep longing in your soul. Jesus says it will never end, never cease until you find it in me. Psalm 107, it says, for God, he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. So what are we fighting for? Fighting every day to see Jesus as enough. So second thought, what are we fighting for? From verse 7, we're fighting to live with the end in mind. I get this directly from verse 7. Look at verse 7. Paul writes, we brought nothing into the world. When you were born, Paul says you're born with nothing as a baby, as an infant, and we can't take anything out of the world. In other words, making more, acquiring more, getting more material possessions, getting more money, it's all, at the end of the day, it's pointless because all those things will be left behind when we die. And so he's pointing Timothy to a bigger perspective. It's an eternal perspective. And he's saying this thought that finding contentment is connected to living and being aware of this single reality. Come on, Pinelake family. This is not your home. That eternity is actually closer than you think it is. In Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about the value of living with what he would say is the end in mind. And he goes on to give this illustration. He in his book talks about, just for a second, imagine you're at a funeral. And there's a casket in front of the room, and somebody comes up to deliver a eulogy. And he says, pause. And I just for a second imagine the person in the casket is you. Who's at your funeral? Is there a lot of people? Is there a little bit of people? Who's the person delivering your eulogy? And then what would they say? And he writes this in his book. He says, when you imagine someone giving your eulogy, did you imagine that he'd talk about your resume, how much money you made, how big your house was, all about your beach house on 30A, how many cars you owned, your job titles, that you had thousands of Instagram followers? Probably not, right? Why? Because what we value most starts to come to the surface when we think and live with the end in mind, that what we value most starts to carry great weight in our life when we live with the end in mind. And I think Paul is inviting you today and Timothy to do the exact same thing. And he's saying all the stuff you fill your life up with, all the money, the possessions, the boats, it has no ultimate spiritual value. And it will not secure your way to God. It won't produce contentment in this life. I love what one commentator stated on this verse. He says, gold is a precious commodity on earth. Gold is a precious commodity. However, God uses it to pave the streets. And so this is not me saying God hates your stuff and possessions. Don't hear that. Don't hear that message today. This is me saying God just knows they don't satisfy your deepest longings. Jesus said it himself on living with the end in mind in Mark chapter 8. Mark records these words. He says, what good is it, I mean, you're familiar with this verse, for what? For someone to gain the whole world, to have it all, to accomplish it all. As Tom Brady was saying, I mean, he's probably, according to world standards, he's accomplished it all. What good is it to accomplish it all and yet forfeit your soul? And I've been reading in my own Bible reading plan, reflecting on this reality. Paul, I've been reading through the letters of Paul. I'm in the 2-year plan. I'd encourage you to get on a Bible reading plan. Pinelake has 4 different plans you can choose from. I'm in the 2-year, and right now in the 2-year, we've just been walking through the letters of Paul. And I'm underlining and noting every time Paul points the churches that and the people that he's writing to, he points them to eternity. He would call it the finish line. He points them to this reality. This isn't your home. And I've just been awakened to the reality. Paul was aware that there's power in living with the end in mind. He wrote this to the church in Corinth, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Therefore, we don't lose heart. We don't have to ever lose heart, because outwardly we might feel like we're wasting away. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So he says we fix our eyes on what is, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. I think practically a couple honest questions you could ask yourself every day. Am I worried about making a name for myself in this world or the next? Do I have an unhealthy relationship right now with things and stuff that will not matter in the end? You see, when we start to think in light of eternity, it changes everything. 3 to 4 years ago, there was a kid in our college ministry. His name was Norwood. He's now serving on staff at Pinelake, Madison as a resident and their missions, as a missions pastor. And Art received Jesus at a worship night. He joined my small group the next day after he's received Jesus, and dude was just on fire for the Lord. And I remember getting lunch with him pretty quickly after he received Jesus, and he had a million questions for me. Like, a list of all these different questions he was wanting to ask me about Jesus and the story and the Gospels. And so we just start talking through all these questions. I'll never forget, at the end of the conversation, he just said, Austin, tell me everything I need to know about making sure what I do on this side of eternity affects the next. And he said, I'm going to tell everybody about this. And he was so excited. It's just on fire for the Lord. And I remember finishing the lunch conversation. I called my wife after that, and I was like, this is the best job in the world. This is what I'm called to do. I was so excited. But if I'm just being honest, I think life, circumstances, things that we walk through can drown out that vigor and passion for what is really and what really matters. Come on, y'all feel that? And I'm talking to Starkville, Oxford, Madison, Clinton online here at the Res. This is what we believe. This is what you walked in today and claimed to believe, that this isn't even your home. And that one day you will live in eternity with Jesus forever and ever, and yet we're worried about who makes more, who's got the bigger house, who appears to have it all together on social media, whose kid's better at a sport, which travel ball team your kid is on. You see, real contentment isn't too difficult for those whose home is in heaven. Colossians chapter 3 says, since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your heart on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. And I'm not saying, okay, well, preacher, I just won't care about anything anymore. You're telling me nothing matters? This isn't even my home? No, here's what I'm saying. That now everything matters in light of eternity and under the banner of Jesus Christ. To go enjoy God. Go enjoy your kids, your family. Go do your work, what God has called you to do, to the glory of God, and live your life. Paul would say it in Philippians 2, verses 17 and 18. He says, live your life as a drink offering. Pour it out for the goodness and the glory of God. So this means your work and your parenting and the way you serve at church, the people you hang with at the tailgates, the people you hang with on the weekends. It is all now an invitation for what? Eternal impact. That eternity puts a purpose on everything. So it's learning to fight. It's a fight. I'm fighting to what? To live with the end in mind. As much as I want to get distracted and pushed in a different manner, God, I know there's a greater calling, and there's things that matter more than what these temporary things that I'm seeing and feeling right now. So fight to live with the end in mind. Fight each day to view that Jesus is enough. And then lastly, from verse 8, I think it's fighting to appreciate what you do have. And I get it. This is what Grandma and Grandpa are going to say in a little less than 2 weeks at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Come on, count your blessings, young man. Live with gratitude. But this is exactly where Paul leads Timothy. Do you see what he said in verse 8? He says, for if we have food and clothing, the necessities in life, let us learn to be content with that. And this is a life lesson from Paul. Come on, Pinelake family. If God blesses you with anything more than what is necessary, which is so many of us at all of our campuses, so many of you in the room at the Rest today, if God blesses you with more than what is necessary, take it thankfully and use it for God's glory. But if you have no more than what is just necessary, you still have no reason for complaints. Why? Contentment is connected to learning to be satisfied with what you do have. And you might not have everything you want today, but you have everything you need. And did you notice Paul's writing on the most necessary aspects of survival? Food, drink, clothing. He says, Timothy, if you got those things, you should be good with that. And he's contrasting between the essentials in life and having wealth. And I would say that translates to 2022 as the difference between needs and wants. That I have everything I need. This is finding peace in what I would say is simplicity. 3 weeks ago, my son Grayson turned 1, and Pinelake Starkville on his 1-year-old birthday was heading to Bull Bottom Farms in Duck Hill, Mississippi. We'd never been to Bull Bottom Farms. We'd heard it's a really cool pumpkin patch, and so we were excited because he's starting to be a little more active. He's walking now. He walks like Frankenstein with his hands in the air. And so we were so excited to take him to the pumpkin patch. And it was on his birthday. We got there. We saw all the opportunities, the slides, the hayride, the animals. And we were like, we're going to be the awesome parents and take him on everything. And so we eat some lunch, and then we start to take him through all the different slide and hayride and the animal. And He's not wanting any of it. As a matter of fact, while he's in the middle of on this train, he's like reaching towards the front of the pumpkin patch going, We're like, what does he want? And Megan's mother intuition, she goes, well, maybe he wants the animals at the front of the pumpkin patch. So we go up to the animals. One of the animals, because while we were, looking at the pigs and the animals, he all of a sudden is going, and he's reaching for, over towards the left side of the pumpkin patch are like 70 or 80 big orange pumpkins. And he's just wanting to go hang with the pumpkins. So we go over there for a few minutes, and he's just laughing and walking from pumpkin to pumpkin. And I'm, do what every dad does. I do like a little experiment. So I pick him up, and I start walking away from the pumpkins, and he starts screaming. So we go, I guess this is where we're going to hang today at the pumpkin patch. I have a picture of Grayson and all his pumpkins. Look at that guy. We stayed there the entire time. And as I was driving home, God just started to remind me, Grayson was teaching me a lesson. Look, I didn't need any of those things. I had everything I needed right there. And it was a reminder even for me in my own soul, in my own life. I don't need anything. I have everything I need. And so Pinelake family, God has provided. He takes care of you. You can quit striving and worrying and trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to make sure your life measures up with everybody else's life. Thank God for what you do have because you are blessed. And I don't think this necessarily has anything to do with how much stuff you actually have. I do think it can make it harder when you have more. But whether you have a little or you have a lot, it's cultivating a disposition of joy that isn't connected to your stuff, that contentment isn't found in stuff. And the secret is learning to be grateful for what you do have. Paul writes to the church in Thessalonica, 1 Thessalonians 5:18, this is the Thanksgiving verse, but he says this, he goes, give thanks in all circumstances. Why? Because this is God's will for you. This is God's desire for your life is to give thanks in all circumstances. So he says you don't have to give thanks for everything. You just need to learn to give thanks in everything. That in the good and in the bad, he is sovereign, he is in charge, and you're realizing he's enough and he's got it. But let's be real. This is one of those verses that I know it's heretical and it's blasphemy. I kind of wish I could change a little bit. Y'all ever do that? Like you read a verse, you're like, I wish I could just change this. I know I can't. I would rather just go, you know what? In most or some things, give thanks. Not in all things. Because if I'm just being honest, there are days when I just don't feel thankful. It's hard to find reasons to be thankful. But I realized this week. He says in everything give thanks. Not in everything give thanks when you feel like it. That this command has nothing to do with your feelings. It has everything to do with it being a choice for you to do what God says. It's a command. He's saying be thankful in all things. And what you'll start to learn is that a grateful heart is a content heart. And a content heart is a restful heart. Doesn't that sound good? A restful heart. You're not always restless. You're not always overthinking and striving. It's just, I'm good. I got everything I need. And if you can't enjoy and celebrate the good things that God gives, you can't learn what it means to enjoy the good Father. So you have to be grateful for what you do have. And practically, just real practical, number one, I'd say limit social media. Because what happens on social media, come on adults, on Facebook, this is what you do, is you start to look at somebody's highlight reel and compare it with your everyday life. And all of a sudden you get discontent because you're like, my life is not like theirs. Yeah, because it's their highlight reel. You're putting all the best pictures too. Go on my Instagram page right now. I'm not showing you the bad pictures of my son, all the great pictures. So maybe this holiday season, limit social media so you can be a more content, restful person. Number two, I'd say make counting your blessings one of the first things you do in the morning. That's super simple, but in the busyness and the hurriedness of life, just take a moment. Say, God, thank you for breath in my lungs, for a beating heart, for healthy kids. Maybe you're older in age. Thank you for a body that still functions, knees that still work. I mean, there's so much you have to be grateful for, and all of a sudden just it helps you get going throughout your day. I have a friend who every morning cup of coffee, he's the entire time he's drinking it, he's just listing out in his heart things that he's thankful for, which makes me think, do you do anything with your life? And then also makes me think, how fast do you drink your cup of coffee? But it's an incredible thought. Just make counting your blessings one of the first things you do. So it's a fight. Pinelake family, it's a fight. And I pray you start to live in the reality of what it means. What's the secret to contentment? It's fighting to view Jesus as the treasure, as the prize. It's fighting to live with the end in mind. This isn't even your home. And then fighting to be grateful for what you do have. And I'm so in this with you. A lot of times, you're preaching to yourself. I am so preaching to myself. Last night, stayed at the Hilton by myself right here in Flowood. My wife's still back in Starkville, and I was praying through the message. It was a peaceful night. Come on, somebody with young kids. I was just resting in the hotel, laid on my bed after praying through the message, put my phone on the charger. All was right, and I pulled out my phone, and I click on social media, what a lot of us do, and I noticed that one of my friends that I went to college with who just turned 30, and I had recently just turned 30, for his 30th birthday, he was in Hawaii. I've never been to Hawaii. And all of a sudden, just discontentment came into my soul. I'm just being real with you guys. All of a sudden, I was like, oh man, what is my life? What am I doing with my life? Man, I can't take Megan and my wife to Hawaii. And all these things start running through my head, and I felt the Lord just kind of say, Austin, run your race. So I speak that over the room today. Go run your race. Don't try to run their race. Go run your race. Fight to see that finish line, to live with the end in mind. Jesus is enough. And I'll end with one final story. There's a story that's told of Ali Hafed. He was an ancient Persian. He was a wealthy man because he was content. He was a content man because he was wealthy. He had this big, bountiful farm, beautiful family. And one day an old priest walked into his farm and started having a conversation with him. And he told him that if he found a diamond the size of his thumb, then he could buy a dozen farms like this. And so Ali, like most of you, said, well, where do I find diamonds? And he gave him some instruction and direction on where to go find diamonds, but he had to travel to and far. And that night, he went to bed a discontent, unhappy man because he didn't have diamonds. The next morning, story goes, he sold his property, sold everything, and went in pursuit of diamonds, invited his family just to go live with a neighbor. And for the rest of his life, Ali chased after these bright, light, shining diamonds. Never found them. Traveled throughout all of Europe, all of Asia. And meanwhile, in the process, Ali dies an unhappy man. In the process, there's another man who comes to buy his farm, his successor. And one day he leads his camel out to drink in the water, and he sees a bright shining light in Ali's backyard. Pulls it out, and there's a diamond. And the story goes that they rushed out and they stirred up the white sands with their fingers, and they came up with many more beautiful, valuable gems. And according to the story, it marked the discovery of the diamond mounds of Golconda, the most valuable diamond mines in the history of the ancient world. Had Ali just stayed in his backyard, he would have realized it was there the whole time. This principle for us today is that you have everything you need because you have Jesus. That you can dig deep into the things of Jesus today. That's all you need. And that one day we will all inherit glorious riches beyond anything this world can offer. You can find contentment, fulfillment, satisfaction in Him. He alone is enough. Is enough. Can I invite you just where you're at, close your eyes for just a moment. And what did you bring in this morning that you were so discontent about? What were you comparing yourself to in life that had caused so much complaint and discontent? What are you right now? Bring it before the Lord. God, I've been discontent about this. This is what it is for me. God has your attention. Can you just say, Jesus, you're enough? Jesus, give me strength to realize you are enough for me. There's nothing this world offers that compares to you. All eyes closed. Maybe today you want to make a decision for Jesus. There's no way you can ever find contentment disconnected from Him. And maybe today is your day. You invite Him into your story for the first time. As we sing this last song, you come down front, pray with somebody. Maybe that's not your story. Maybe for some of you today, you just need to come down front and have somebody pray because you have been living in this for so long. And you're the believer who still hasn't found contentment, and you need Jesus to bring it and invite Him into that story today. Come be prayed over as we respond and we sing at any of our campuses. Online, there's different ways on the screen that you can respond. King Jesus, you're enough for us, Jesus. You are our treasure. Lord, there's nothing in this world that satisfies compared to you. So God, as we worship you, as we respond to you, may our heart be centered on that single reality that this isn't even our home. And so we're living to impact what's to come, which is so far greater, so much better. Jesus, your way is better. We worship you. We love you. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.